The following program is rated T for teen for the use of tools and materials that can be harmful to unsupervised usage. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello everyone, Mr. Waugh here from Mr. Waugh Media, and yes, that is my actual name. Today's episode, we're going to make some ruins. Ruins are a great universal piece of scenery that you can use in pretty much any tabletop game. With your imagination and this episode, we'll give you the building blocks to basically put this into any setting you like. Whether it's a fantasy world that catapult fire is destroyed, or modern warfare in a distant land, or the far future in alien ruins. Whatever it is, we'll show you how to build a basic piece. Let's get started. First up, we're going to make the foundation for our piece. I'm going to use some styrofoam and I'm going to use some cardboard. And this is about 6 inches by 6 inches. When I'm making my cuts, I make sure to do several small passes instead of going one long pull. That way I don't tear and damage the material. Now, when it comes to the buildings themselves, I tend to round out the bases. For me, it just seems a little bit strange seeing a square base on a tabletop, so I try to keep them round or at least oval in shape. Once that's out of the way, I'm going to do the most complex thing ever. I'm going to trace it out and cut it out with some scissors. I know, I have not seen this kind of skill level since I was in kindergarten, but, you know, I believe in you guys. You can probably do that. Okay, I'm just trying to buy time here, man. This is really, you know. All right, well, here, we're going to hit it with the hot glue gun now. This is really exciting. Got my little swirl going. We're going to mount that as firmly as I can and trim off any of the excess. Next up, we're going to take an X-Acto blade and we're going to cut at an angle to round out the edges. Now make sure your blade is nice and sharp. You'll see here my blade kind of catches there. It's a little dull at the top, so give myself a bit more blade to slice a little bit cleaner through there. We're now going to tackle the main part of the build, the ruins themselves. And if you ever seen my episode on dungeon tiles, it's going to be a very similar concept, just on a much larger scale. These ones are about 3 inches by 4 inches on a 1/2 inch thick styrofoam sheet. This is adequate to make a small to medium sized building with 2 stories for most 28mm, which is kind of the standard for the industry. And there you can see we have our crude walls here. Unfortunately, now we have to do the most time-consuming process, drawing out all the bricks. Now, as I mentioned, if you've seen the dungeon episode, you've seen how I do this one. I'm basically going to take a ruler to make each layer of the bricks, and then in between, I'll draw each of the brick lines. I'm going to go a little bit thicker than I normally would for this one because I want to show a little bit more on the camera. I noticed some of my other builds that I tried in mock-ups, you couldn't really make out the details. So I'm purposely making these lines and the bricks, they're going to be a bit bigger than normal. Also, I'm just rambling right now because I have to do 4 panels of bricks. And this is the most boring and time-consuming part. So, time jump! With the front bricks now done, we're going to bash the walls in with the X-Acto blade. I'm going to cut from the top to bottom in a sort of zigzag pattern here. Make sure you hold on to this piece that we're chipping away, it'll come in useful later. Don't need to be surgical with this one. In fact, you can see I'm just picking the walls apart, bashing it in. Then I'll take my pen here and just etch in the places where the bricks naturally would have lain. After I'm done that, I'll pick away at the walls, trying to make it look a little bit more battle damaged. Then I'm going to go on to the other side. And it's the same process as before. We're just going to etch all the bricks in here. I try to match them as close as I can, but don't worry about it too much. It's only a little bit awkward when you get to the broken areas with all the damage and suddenly the 2 lines don't match up on each side. But, I mean, these are the small details. With the second panel now fully etched out, it's time to break the second wall. I'll take my blade and do the exact same cut I did before, starting from top to bottom, working my way up. And again, remember to hold on to this fragment, it'll come in useful later. I'll then pick it apart with my fingers, I'll take the blade to this thing to make it look really battle damaged. Once I've got that all out of the way, I'm going to try to carve a door here. I'm sort of freestyling it here, it's about, I want to say 1 inch wide by maybe 2 inches tall. I'll do something similar on the second panel by putting in a window. It's going to be about 2 inches long by about 1 inch tall. Once again, when you cut this thing out, make sure you hold on to the fragment, because it will come in handy later on. It's now time to glue everything together. My go-to is the hot glue gun since it pretty much hardens right away, but you could use white glue if you want to, just be prepared to wait a lot longer. Once I got the two panels together, we're now going to glue it to the base itself, like so. And then we can get started on the second floor. For something of this size, it's going to be about 2 to 3 inches wide by maybe about 4 to 5 inches long. I'll cut that out of the cardboard here, make sure it fits snugly. Actually, it's just sitting there without even glue. There we go. It's perfect. It was meant to be. From there, I'll grab some coffee stir sticks. It'll probably take about a dozen or so to do the floor panel. And I'll break them off a few centimeters over the length of the cardboard. I'll make them various lengths just to make it interesting. Looks like maybe something smashed through the floor here. And then I'll glue them into place. I'll stick with the hot glue gun for now, but you could easily use the white glue or crazy glue, super glue, duct tape if you want, whatever's going to hold it in place there. Actually, maybe no, skip the duct tape. I don't think that's really going to work very well. But glue of some sort. Once you've got all the panels in place, just trim off any of the excess cardboard that might be there and make sure that it sits nice and flush with the walls. We're now going to work on the bottom floor, and there's a couple different ways we can tackle this. We could keep it naturally dirt, we could have the wooden panels down there as well for some nice floorboards. My usual go-to is actually cutting out pieces of cardboard that are 1 inch by 1 inch and gluing them down as tiles. That usually looks really slick, but I wanted to try something a little different this time around. I wanted to see if I could save myself a little bit of time by actually etching some cobblestones into the styrofoam sheet. It's about 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch wide. I made sure that it fits nicely in there, and it doesn't actually look too bad, all things considered. I'm going to trim off the little excess on the edges here so it fits a little bit snugly and doesn't overshoot the base here. But you know what? Overall, that's not terrible for like a quick build. Once we mount the floor firmly in place, it's time to work on a column that'll help support the second story. We'll take some of that excess brick that we had from earlier on, and we're going to break it down a little bit, till it's about, I want to say 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. I'll keep shaving away at it a little bit until I get it to just the right height to help support the column, and once I'm more or less satisfied, I'll go back with the pen and try to etch out the bricks a little bit more to make it a bit more uniform. Then, taking the hot glue gun, we'll mount it to the floor, and then attach the second story to the bricks as well. It's now demolition time. We're going to take all those scraps that we saved up and start gluing them around the base here. Now, I'm going to glue them at different angles to make it look random and chaotic, as if it took maybe some battle damage, maybe a monster ran into the building, or artillery strikes, or even just the decaying of time. I'll hot glue them into place. Again, you can use the white glue if you want to have a little bit more flexibility, and you can actually position them a bit better. But for me, I'm just slapping them here haphazardly, and just going from there. With some of the pieces, I'll even go back in with the pen afterwards and etch in a few more bricks, just to keep it looking a little bit more uniform. And now I'm just going to break off some other pieces, shave other areas down, just to get that final look down pat. With that out of the way, we're now going to work on the window. We'll break off some of the coffee stir sticks to be the length of the window and mount one firmly in the middle. We'll then glue one on either side of it to make it a 3-wide window sill. Now, you could do an entire frame if you so chose, doing the top, the sides, maybe a little brickwork as well. For this one, I'm keeping it relatively simple here, but totally up to you how complicated you want to make it. Alright, it's now time to add sand all over the base. We're going to apply a nice thick layer of white glue and go to town here. I'll apply it all along the baseline, but also across the bricks, some of the cobblestone on the ground floor, along the wall segment here, just all over the place to show the decay, the ruin, the destruction of this piece. And not really much more to say on this one, so I'm just going to fast forward a little bit here, and we'll go on to the next step. We're going to grab ourselves some generic sand, and we're going to apply it everywhere that we've laid down our white glue. Now, you could at this point add small stones or other pieces of rubble if you want to, totally up to you, what kind of a environment you want this to take place in. Now, here's some interesting behind the scenes kind of commentary. It takes Mia and I about 4 hours from start to finish to shoot all the raw material, and that includes the intro, the outro, all the building, and the painting. The problem is, because we have such a small time window to shoot this all in, we can't really wait on this glue to dry, so I've already pre-built a second ruin that I tried to match as close as I could to the first one. And that way, we can just jump right now into the painting segment. And just FYI, the 4 hours, that is just to shoot the raw material. That doesn't include any of the editing, the voiceover work I gotta do, the mixing. The rest of that can take anywhere from about 1 to 2 weeks. So yeah, we put a lot of work into these episodes, and I hope you guys really like them and like the sound of my voice as much as I do now. Alright, enough horsing around here. Let's actually get to work. For this first part, it's going to be the exact same technique that you saw in my dungeon tile episode. If you didn't catch that one, here's a quick recap. We're using 3 parts black to 1 part white to make this nice dark gray color. And we're going to apply a pretty liberal layer all across this entire piece, anywhere there's stone. Now, if it does get onto the other segments, don't worry about it too much. We will be going back over them at a later time. So just try to keep it as consistent as possible here, and I'm just going to do a time lapse. For our next step, we're going to take 1 part black to 1 part white to make a nice medium gray color, and we're going to dry brush that lightly across all the stones. In case you need a refresher, dry brushing is where you remove almost all the paint from the bristles and lightly apply it across the surface. Not much more to say about this step. I'm going to apply it across all of the bricks, and I think I'll do another time lapse here just to speed the process up. Next up, we're going to do 3 parts white to 1 part black to get that light gray color, and dry brush that even lighter across all the brick surface. Not much more to say on this one either, so we're going to do another time lapse and jump to the next step. For the next step, we're going to take some pure white and do a very light dusting along the edges. It's a very soft layer of dry brushing. Not much more to say on this one either, so we're going to do another time lapse and jump to the next step. Now that the bricks and the stones are all taken care of, it's time to work on the second story and the ground layer. To do this, we're going to take 1 part black and 1 part brown to make a nice dark chocolate color. I'm going to dry brush that across the wooden surface. On the ground floor, however, I'm going to apply it a lot thicker. Now, if you want some great advice on how to do different wooden textures and techniques, check out my episode called Wooden Panels, where we break down 3 different styles of how to paint wood. There's a beginner, an advanced, which is what I'll be using here, and there's also a photorealistic. So check that one out if you want to see some more in-depth. And if you have seen the previous episodes, you're probably going to recognize the floor because it's the exact same technique that I used in the dungeon one. Once that's all fully dried, we're going to go back in there and dry brush with a generic brown across the wooden surface. If you've seen the previous episode, you'll know my technique, side to side. When you're dry brushing, it makes a world of a difference what direction you go when it comes to the grains. And as for the base itself, I'm just going to slap it on there all sloppy-like because it's, well, it's a dirt floor. It doesn't need to be pretty. I mean, it is pretty. Who am I kidding? Everything I build is pretty. I love all my children equally. Some just less than others. That's all. Next up, we're going to take 1 part golden yellow and 1 part brown to make a nice rich sandy tone. And I'm going to dry brush that across most of the planks. I'll also dry brush it on the surface, though not quite as light as I do with a floorboard, but not as heavy as my first couple layers were. While I'm at it, I'm also going to do the inside window sill. You can't really see it from this angle, but that is getting touched up at the same time. And from there, I'm just going to do the rest of the ground surface. While the paint's still wet on the palette, I'm going to add a little bit of white to the mix to make the sand an even lighter tone. This is going to be dry brushed very evenly across the floorboards and the ground surface as a light dusting. I'm just going to speed this up a little bit here and we'll finish off the rest of the base. This next step is going to be the most time consuming when it comes to the painting side of things. We're going to take some black paint and heavily water it down. Then, with a thin brush, we're going to apply it in between each and every one of the cracks of the bricks. Now, if you do get it on some other surfaces, don't worry about it too much. You can always wipe it off with a cloth or even your thumb if you catch it fast enough. Alternatively, you could even add a little bit of water and a little bit more paint so that it streaks downward, leaving behind some grimy trails. Now, I need to apologize for this next step because we actually don't have the raw footage. Normally, we would finish off the painting segment by washing the entire piece in Agrax Earthshade from Citadel Paints, but for whatever reason, we can't get the file to work right now. So unfortunately, you're going to have to just use your imagination and just picture me dousing this entire thing in a nice wash. Alternatively, you can go back and watch me in the Dungeon Tile episode and sort of see how I apply it there. But yeah, for whatever reason, I apologize that it didn't work. After giving plenty of time for the Agrax Earthshade to fully dry, we're going to start applying some flock. To do this, we simply take some of the white glue, spread it around, and apply the flock on top of it. Sometimes you want to press into the flock so that it stays on there a little bit better, but for the most part, you can just throw it on there. Now, in case you're wondering, this is just some generic grassland flock. It's probably the most common type out there. But feel free to use any other types that you want. If you want to add a little bit more burnt grass or some more wildflowers, it certainly will make it pop out. I'm just going to tap off the leftover flock from this, and we're pretty much done here. I'm just going to slow the footage down a little bit and do a little rotation so we can look at the whole piece. Overall, I'm really happy with this one. It only took a couple hours to crank out, minus the drying time of course, but I think it looks really good. And we didn't even do the advanced stuff like adding moss or extra ruins or stonework around the doors and windows. It's just a simple ruin gaming piece. And if you have a free weekend, you could easily crank out several of these in that time frame of different sizes and scales. So I'm really happy with this one, and I hope you folks are as well. Well, that's been today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Maybe you found some useful information. If you did, make sure you hit the like, the share, subscribe down below, and pass this around to all your friends. We're really trying to build this from the ground up. And if there's anything you want me to build on a future episode, let me know in the comments down below, and maybe we can get to it in the future. On that note, I've been Mr. Waugh from Mr. Waugh Media. We'll see you later.